Hey, welcome to csc230 class. We're going to work on EX2, and before we get started, I'm just going to give you a little overview, and then we'll get started on it. We're actually going to duplicate our EX1 folder and make an EX2 folder, just so they're different, just so you're not just working on the first one. So make sure you're careful when you're doing that. But what I want to do right now is just show you the finished product. The last thing we did on EX1 before we worked on our CSS exercises is we just kind of set up a little web page with a header image. It has a H1, it has 2 paragraphs, and it has 2 lists and a little copyright thing at the end. That's it. Very simple page on a white background. This is generic HTML. We didn't change anything. This is all the default spacing, default sizes, default fonts, default layout of everything for HTML. And what we're going to do is we're going to use CSS and we're going to make it look like this. And just to point out a couple things that we have going on here is we have kind of an off-white background that I pulled from this photo a little bit. I have a white kind of background on the body of our document that I pulled from kind of the white, well, it's, the white of the snow. And then also what we did is we centered this. We're going to make this centered so that the whole body centers when you move the page. Now this is not responsive, meaning when it gets too small, it gets covered up. So we're going to work with responsive next. But for now, it does center in a page. So on a big monitor, this would center in the page. So it does center in the page. It's set at a fixed width. So it's set at the same width as this image, which is 800 pixels. So we're going to set everything at that width. We're going to put some padding in this area here. That's called padding. Padding is in the inside of an element, not on the outside. Margin is on the outside, and that's actually how this is done with margin. It's called an auto margin on either side. There's auto margin here, and there's auto margin here. And also we have an H1 tag, which is our my EX2. You can see it's in a serif font, Georgia. We have our 2 paragraphs, the some recent shows and some things. They're basically just bolder, a little bit bigger, and they're in like a blue color, which I kind of pulled from here a little bit. I didn't change these things at all. I left them at their default, although we did have to move everything in. And then I threw an image on here, and we're going to do that. We're going to use something called a figure and a fig caption to do this, and it's actually going to float. We're going to use something called a float, where it's going to float to the right of one of our elements. But don't worry about this right now, because that's the last thing we're going to worry about. We want to worry about doing everything else, because we do have a lot to do. We have a little border that goes on here. We have to change colors, we have to change fonts, and we have to change layout. And we're going to use CSS to do that. And we're going to do that right in our, if you could see this document here, we're going to do it right in style tags within our document. That's called internal CSS. That way, the benefit of that is we're only working on one page and everything's together in one page. If we were working on a larger site, it would be better to be linking to an external CSS file, but we're going to keep our CSS right in the document. So the CSS will be in our head tag. And in our first one that we actually created, here's our first document. I actually have a place for it, and that's where we're going to put all our CSS styles within those style tags. That's where we're going to put all our CSS, and it's going to look something like this. We're going to reset the margin and padding. We're going to put a background color on the HTML footer. We're going to have to kind of mess with some things. It's never perfect. We always have to, because some things affect other things, and depending on what we do, just little things. Just for example, the border, if I put the border around the whole thing, it's not actually around this image here. If I put it around the whole thing, because I had padding on that too, it put space inside the image, which I didn't want. So I ended up just putting the border just around this part down here that's white. And there's different ways to do that. We could have the border around everything, but you always have to make changes to other things. So we're going to try to do it as simple as we can in the beginning as we learn to use CSS a little more on a real page instead of working with just exercises and lists and things like that we were doing in W3 schools and CodePen. So we're going to work on building this, and then after that, then we'll do our image and we'll put that in there, and then we'll start working on making it responsive so that when you resize it, everything will resize too, and that involves using a lot of percentages and things like that. But we're going to kind of implement some CSS for our layout right now. So I'm going to get started in Cloud 9.